Welcome to this week's OK at Work with myself, Sarah Sawyer, and my colleague, Russell Berger, both attorneys at Offit Kurman. And today we are talking about a trend that I know I've been seeing a lot in headlines and big companies that are bringing employees back into the office. Often employees who had moved away during COVID. I know that's been like a big part of it as well, is that, like giving people, I know I saw a big company in the headlines recently that, they said you have this much time to move back to an area where we have an office or we're terminating you. So some pretty kind of, I will call them harsh directives, I think, that are coming down to employees. So what are some things that you're seeing, Russell, and seeing people consider when in this regard?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems to be a growing trend. And I think, the underlying issue is that employers are finding it hard to manage and engage employees remotely. And, if you, flash back to some of the conversations we were having in 2020, we talked a lot about like you have to figure out how to manage, how to engage, how to make people feel connected to their company, to their work, to their team, while they're not physically proximate. And I think what we're kind of seeing now is not a throwing in the towel, but a recognition like this is harder than we thought it was going to be. And so, the easiest solution is to bring people back in and do what we know works because it worked before, and try to recreate that. Of course, as you point out, like if you move away because you think your job's remote, now you got a real problem. That you're not going to be very engaged if someone tells you got to move back, 3 states away, so you can come into the office 2 days a week. So, I think the big thing for any employer that's thinking about, well, I'm having a hard time engaging, and I think I need to have people in person a little bit more. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thought, but I think where really the emphasis should go is in how do I do that? And how do I message that? And how do I do it in a way that, actually achieves the goal? Because if I burn too many bridges, if I upset too many people by telling them, oh, you got to be back in on Tuesdays and Thursdays, that's not going to work well, and it's going to be counterproductive to the overall goal.
Yeah, I think it's also very interesting from a talent management perspective, because we've got folks that I'm sure may have moved away, but they're a very valuable employee. And are you going to make certain exceptions for some people, and how does that impact the dynamics, right? So anytime that we have an employer say, well, we're going to cast this like broad net and create this very systematic rule, that can be fine and when well implemented, but you kind of always run into these issues where it's like, well, our star employee who we really can't survive without lives 3 states away. What are we doing with them? And how is that going to, and if we make an exception for them, like, what does that look like? How does that impact morale? How does that impact things? And then also from a just, demographics perspective, and keeping an eye out for not any, accidentally engaging in any discriminatory trends. You also want to make sure you're applying these rules fairly, and that you're looking at the demographics and not treating one class of people different than another, even if it's incidental. So definitely a lot to think about there. And anytime that there's a very strict rule like that that's going into effect, there's going to be a desire for wanting to make some exceptions, and that comes with risk and other challenges.
Right, right. Well, from a let's not get sued for discrimination standpoint, having a clear policy, a clear objective policy, and following it is the best way to mitigate that risk. But it's really hard to manage people and manage all the various situations that you might, encounter if you're being that objective and that formulaic. So, I think that really goes into the design of the management plan. How do you bring people back in? How often do you do it? How are you going to be flexible with people that have moved away? And to me, I think a lot of it really has to do with demonstrating that coming back in the office will be a benefit to you, the employee, as opposed to an obligation on you, the employee. And what sorts of things, will employees feel like they're benefiting from by being back in the office? Is it just nice to be around the team members? Is there some growing and training and development that employees are really going to care about that can happen? I mean, I think like at some point, like buying everyone lunch was an effective way to do that. I think that's a little bit less appealing now than it was a year or two ago. But but providing lunch never hurts anybody. So, so there's all sorts of things that, what is it that's going to make an employee feel good about coming back into the office and feel more connected? And because again, like that's what you're really after. So I really think there's some value in thinking about, again, not just the how, but the like, what are we hoping to accomplish? Like, what do we want the employee to walk away feeling after this? Like, they know we're invested in them. They feel supported. They feel trained. They feel protected. Whatever it is, just figure that out and use that as kind of a cornerstone to designing some return to work and engagement activities.
Yeah, and determining whether it's the best way to achieve those goals, if there's other ways. And one thing just in closing to always keep in mind as well is, from a legal compliance perspective, is that there may still be times where even if you have a rigid policy, that you might need to give someone an accommodation under the ADA, or there might be other things to consider. So even within the confines of a strict policy and following that strict policy, there's still going to be other considerations, especially if people used to be remote. So just some things to keep in mind and, be thoughtful about. And I think that's something we're always talking about on this, on OK at Work, is just, don't leave your practical mind, at the door when you start thinking about these things, for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks, Russell. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Sarah.